a lot of people assumed that it just couldn't be created, right? Because somebody else tried, especially one of the biggest players in the space like Adobe and Macromedia, they failed, so something must not be possible. But in my mind, I was like 100% sure, even when I got a lot of doubt from other people, like you talk to investors who are like, oh, this will never work out. I walked away from that almost like just discounting it. I was like, oh, they don't know anything. Like it's obviously going to work. To me, it was just so obvious that it's the current way that things work is broken and it needs to be fixed that I was just 1000% convinced that I need to build that thing, that specific idea. Hi, I'm Vlad Magdalin. I am the CEO and one of the co-founders of Webflow̅, and we create a web platform to allow people to create really professional websites. Webflow̅ is a visual web development platform that allows companies, freelancers, agencies to create really, really sophisticated websites. We have over 200,000 customers, and the last thing I think we shared publicly is we're over $100 million in revenue. Kind of up there in terms of important platforms, but we're still, compared to things like WordPress and larger platforms, are still getting started. I sort of stumbled into it by accident. So I came to the United States as a refugee with my parents, and I didn't really see myself becoming like a designer or a visual artist, but my dad was trying to make some of these, like trying to create some businesses on the side. And that kind of required, he asked me convert some catalogs from English to Russian, and that required learning graphic design. And that led to me getting a job at this place called Russian American Media, which is like running this Russian Yellow Pages, where I was making ads, business cards, different things that was just like graphic design for customers or for clients. That sort of snowballed and led to me wanting to learn 3D animation. It sort of blossomed. The story was a little bit complicated because first I was doing graphic design, and then when I first started going to college, I made the decision to go study computer science because that's what my brother was doing. That's sort of what I heard was like a lucrative career to follow. So I started doing that. I did that for a year, and I had such a hard time doing that. I like really didn't enjoy it that I dropped out and then moved up here to San Francisco to go to the Academy of Art to study 3D animation. The thing that really inspired me to do that was seeing what Pixar was doing. So this was 2001, 2002, where Pixar was like blowing up. Like they were making all these incredible movies, and I was downloading all of these tutorials from the web, learning how to do 3D modeling, 3D effects. And it just gave me this feeling of like empowerment. Whatever story you can imagine, you can kind of like create these scenes and translate them into 3D space and then make a movie from that. I don't think I ever got like really far to creating my own story end to end, like some people could, like where they were, animating from the time that they were a kid. But what really spoke to me was like this technical aspect of like really sophisticated 3D animation tools that were being used in the 3D and movie industry, and trying to learn them through all of these tutorials. And it's sort of like I felt like I was getting superpowered. I actually didn't finish. I dropped out of art school because it was too expensive. I decided to go back to study engineering to the school I was going to before. Then I got a job at a web design agency to sort of start to pay back student loan. In that job, I was working with a design team, creating essentially web design in Photoshop. And I was like intern that was translating those designs into HTML, CSS, basically the web. That's when, one time I had this flash of an idea that why can't the way that 3D animation works, where creatives are doing all of the work in the sophisticated software, pressing a button, it's going to the live screen without a translation layer. Why can't something like that exist for web? So that was the initial inspiration for like Webflow̅ has to be a thing. Like I want to create something like 3D animation tools for web design. And I think even though after that I got another job and started working into it, it already like that idea had already sparked in me that I wanted to try to start this on the side, whether I was like moonlighting or working nights and weekends or trying to find co-founders on the side. Like it was that moment when I was still in college before my first real job that I had this inspiration, like I have to build a company around this, or I have to build a product that is kind of like 3D animation tools, but for web. And effectively Webflow̅ came, but it just took 4 different attempts to make it happen. Honestly, I didn't know anything about business, didn't even think much about how we were going to monetize it, how it was going to make money. I just saw that something was clearly broken or something that could be better. And I just had this very intense confidence that if I was to build it, somebody would be willing to pay. Just like the 3D animation software I was using, some of it I was paying for. Because even as a student, I saw that like, hey, this provides me enough value that even if it was like a student edition, like it's so valuable that I'm willing to pay for it. So I sort of had this thought that I'll figure out how to monetize it later. But the most important thing was like, how do you actually create the tool that solves the problem in a way that I was imagining? And I always thought that was like the first thing to focus on. And a lot of entrepreneurs have this, if you build it, they will come mentality. And that's exactly what I had. I was like, I'll figure out those details later. I just got to build this thing, prove to myself that it's possible, and then we'll try to prove to others that And I honestly thought at that time that it was going to be a company of one. Like I thought I was just going to create it and like maybe sell it to some folks to use. I never thought it was going to become like a company with multiple employees, let alone hundreds. So I was very maybe naive about it. Like I didn't know all the details that go into building a company, but the first thing was like, I need to solve this problem for myself. And I can see that it's kind of broken and I wanted to create a better solution. First time we wound things down, it sort of felt like not really a big failure. It felt more like, hey, I'm getting married. We're talking about having a kid. I have to get a real job. I will keep working on it nights and weekends. So it didn't really feel like a failure at the time. It ended up like petering out. So I just kind of forgot about it for a year. But then the second time, it was a combination of finding another co-founder, working on it nights and weekends. And then that sort of petered out, but I also didn't feel like it was a big failure. The third time definitely felt there was a lot of ups and downs where we got some funding. We actually got incorporated. We had 2 other co-founders. Then the biggest thing that happened, like everything was on track. We had applied for a trademark kind of towards the end after we had pitch put together. So we applied for a trademark. That's sort of kind of what you do to get permission to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row. But then we got a response from the government saying like, there's already a company that has this trademark. And then we got a notice from that company saying like, better not use it. So we got really discouraged, but not discouraged enough to like totally quit. We started working on rebranding the company. So it was going to be not Webflow, but something called Marked Up, like HTML markup, but with some missing vowels. So we had Sergi, who ended up being my co-founder, created a new logo, and we're about to go live. But then that's when kind of life took over. And it was like a slow trickle of like one co-founder being demotivated and leaving, another co-founder sort of saying like, maybe I wouldn't be willing to like risk everything to start a company around this. And a competitor came out, Weebly at the time, that got like $20 million in funding. And I was like, crap, it's over. They already won. Like, how can you possibly catch up when we have zero? We're out of money and they, just got $20 million. So it was like, maybe like giving up then, but maybe a year later, the ideas started to come back around seeing how the competitor was going in a different direction and not building quite the same thing that we would have built, and gaining more confidence in myself as an engineer, knowing that I could like build something independently, started sort of like thinking about bringing the idea back again. It was sort of a fluke, I think an accident or something. It's just like great timing or luck that it was 4 years later, at the end of 2011, I had already moved from Mountain View in the Bay Area to Sacramento, which at that point had a second kid. A trademark certificate arrived to my house that said, congratulations, you own the trademark for Webflow. Because I guess something happened with that other company where they let it expire or they went out of business or whatever. By that time, I was already working still working at my day job, but working with my brother, Sergi, who ended up being one of my co-founders, to build more websites on the side and sort of like starting to develop Webflow. And that was like the perfect sign of like, okay, maybe it's meant to be. Now you can use the name Webflow again. And that's like started the ball rolling again on like starting to plan how we would like leave our jobs, get enough funding to start it again in 2012. It was 1000% idea-based, and it's not just 3D animation, it's like game design, video editing, film production, and compositing. All of these industries have a way to visually directly manipulate very sophisticated, like all of these ways to do like hair simulation and rigid body simulation. So it's not basic sketching like in Photoshop. You're creating like entire systems that are really sophisticated to do like visual effects. When I looked at web design, it was like, it's so obvious that something like that needs to exist. And some companies tried, like Dreamweaver and like Adobe tried many years ago. But I think because they failed early, they were just too early in the market. A lot of people assumed that it just couldn't be created, right? Because somebody else tried, especially one of the biggest players in the space like Adobe and Macromedia, they failed, so something must not be possible. But in my mind, coming from that 3D background, it was just obvious, this needs to exist. So I was like 100% sure, even when I got a lot of doubt from other people, like you talk to investors, like, oh, this will never work out. I walked away from that almost like just discounting it. I was like, oh, they don't know anything. Like it's obviously gonna work. Sometimes that's bad because I wasn't looking at critical input, and it would have been helpful for me to be more critical of like what might not work. But to me, it was just so obvious that it's the current way that things work is broken and it needs to be fixed, that I was just 1000% convinced that I need to build that thing, that specific idea. And I even told my wife, and I honestly thought this, that if it wasn't for this idea, I'd have no interest in starting a startup. Like it was specifically to make this idea happen. If I didn't have that conviction, I'd be perfectly happy like working for Google or Microsoft, whoever. But it was that specific idea around Webflow that I just knew had to become a reality.
Unlike the previous session, I don't have any prizes to give out. Ideas are very important to me. I think that bringing ideas into the world is one of the most important things that people do. And I think that great ideas, these things take on lives of their own, which give meaning to our lives as people. I think a lot about how people create ideas and how ideas grow. What sorts of tools create a healthy environment for ideas to grow?
This was late 2011 that I got this approval to use the trademark, and that got my brain spinning around like, okay, should I start this again? The thing that actually sparked the fourth attempt where I was like, I'm 100% sure. I saw this video called Inventing on Principle, which I think every single founder should see. It's by this person named Brett Victor. And I saw that in early 2012. And when I saw that video, and it has to do with kind of the intersection of art, design, and programming. But another part of it also, like half of the talk is about why do you do the work that you do? Like, what is the purpose behind your professional endeavors? The combination of both of those things, like something that he was talking about being very similar to Webflow, the visual development, visual manipulation land, asking this question of like, are you really fulfilled and do you see a deep sense of purpose from the work that you're doing? That after watching that video, literally the next morning, I called my boss and said, I'm going to be starting a company. Then started building kind of a demo. We didn't really have a product, so the first thing we thought of like, okay, we only have really 3 months of runway of savings to fund our kind of family expenses, etc. So we're going to make a Kickstarter video. So we went all in, kind of got incorporated, started making a Kickstarter video, and started designing the product, what it would look like, how we would show it in the Kickstarter video, so that other people could see what it's going to become, so they can pledge and like give us some financial support, so that we can actually build the product, etc. It turned out that we had completely miscalculated, and by the time we were almost done with the video, we found out that Kickstarter doesn't allow hosted software. So like the entire thing we were building was not compatible with their terms of service. So we kind of had to start from scratch. That was basically money wasted. Started building a demo and started applying to YC. Once we had the first version of a demo without any customers, we applied, didn't get in. That was like a really discouraging, very surprising. I thought we were like for sure going to at least get an interview, but it was a kind of a rude awakening to be like, hey, you're too early. Like all you have is sort of a demo. You don't really have a product yet or any users. We just kept building and kind of decided, because the window to apply again is 6 months later. But by that point, we were already like running out of money. So we just decided, all right, we're going to go like super lean, save as much money as we can, and just keep it like try to build a product that we can actually put in front of people so they can see exactly what it looks like and get it closer to, or like would people be willing to pay for it. So those next 6 months were like really, really tough, but also really fun. Like we were trying to extend every possible like credit card loan that we could arrange, borrowing money from friends, selling cards, converting them to leases. But it was also one of the most motivational time as a company, because we were like do or die. We were day and night working on the design, coding, like building the actual application. By the time March 2013 came around, we had a demo to show. Like all these designer forums like Reddit, Dig at the time, there was like designer news, and it didn't get much traction, but then we put it on Hacker News, which is more of like a developer community. And we thought developers would probably not care about this because the entire tool kind of talks about maybe replacing developers, but it really took off. It's funny, a lot of developers that saw us launch on Hacker News really resonated with the product because they saw how much it could help the people they partner with, like the designers, to get a bunch more done without including them. It's actually one of the things that, I was a developer before where I would take Photoshop files from a designer and translate them to, a CMS or something like that. It was some of the most kind of tedious and boring work. A lot of developers are pulled into, you might have like an entire development team working on product, right? And then the engineering team is pulled into marketing projects to say like, hey, we have this new landing page for a new marketing campaign. Can a developer come in and using this Figma prototype build the marketing page in code? That's some of the most kind of tedious work to do that translation work, because what developers really want to be doing is the more sophisticated things, right? And there's so much demand for those developers on their time that they'd rather be doing that. So I think that's why Webflow resonated so well with developers. Not only did they see that the tool helped designers create by themselves, but also the way that they created by themselves generated really clean code, semantic code that was performant and didn't have the types of issues that other website builders did. That's when we started getting our first version of like traction. And that, with that, we applied to YC. With that, we got into that program, and then like that kind of gave us a lifeline to keep working on it. And the rest is kind of history from there. For a while, I was really happy when we initially launched the idea and started collecting like a list of folks before we could actually sign people up. And it was just really overwhelming to go from failed multiple times, and then we are definitely out of money and at our last attempt and like the last straw, right? Because if that didn't work out, like there's probably no way that it would have taken another 10 years for me to feel confident again to try again, for my wife to feel comfortable taking another financial risk, etc. So it felt really awesome to see that traction and that validation. When we actually launched for real and try to convert that list of, I think it was like 30,000 people on our wait list to customers, I think only like 40 or 50 signed up. So out of like 30,000, 40 or 50, we were like shocked. We thought that maybe we've built something wrong or something. How could we go from tens of thousands of people interested to only a handful, only tens actually paying for it? That didn't feel great. But like over time, we started to like really pay attention to those folks and get closer to them and serve their needs. And that's like slowly started to build a base of more and more customers. Being honest, it wasn't a deep framework. It was customer centricity. Like, how do we keep delivering on our mission? Like, how do we keep listening to customers and keep solving their problems in a way that feels valuable to them? How do we build our team that can help us do that? There was a little bit more of a formal framework called, I read this book called The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek, and it had this structure of like the responsibilities of each business are to first advance a just mission. So something that, or a just cause, something that brings 10 times more value to the world than it does to you. For us, that was like always been the case. For every like $10 we make through our software, one of our users is probably making like $1,000 because they're using it to like sell advanced websites builds to clients, etc. And the second responsibility is to prioritize people in your business decisions. So like, how do you build up your team? How do you create an environment of bringing in amazing people that are empowered to solve these problems for customers? But not just people in your company, but also what effect do your business decisions have on people outside of the company? How do our decisions around how we structure our business impact our users, impact the communities that we live in, impact the environment? Like, really think through that. And only third, the responsibility is to generate revenue, but importantly, not just make money, but in order to do the first two things for as long as possible. So to keep funding and advancing your mission that you believe is like a good thing for the world, and to make sure that you're like factoring in how people along the way. And I've sort of thought about it like that since the early days of like, what decisions do we need to make to keep advancing our mission, to keep bringing the power of web development to more and more people. It's honestly always come down to finding people who like really care about doing this, like bringing more power into other people's hands, spending a lot of time like trying to hire them and bringing them in and empowering them to be successful within the company, etc. I think the two biggest factors, like really thinking about customers and really thinking about the team that is going to get you there. Everything else is like details. So there's a lot of like learning and scale and things that we've had to figure out, a lot of mistakes that we made, but ultimately it's those two things that are always at the center. Our customers and the people who we build builds for, who our entire mission is meant to serve, and our team, like how we behave together, like who comes together to solve this problem for customers. Well, I think the thing that motivated me the most was I wanted this idea to exist. And the other thing is because my family came here 9 years old when we came here as a refugee family. We were on welfare for like 3 years. My dad was trying to like make ends meet. That experience showed me that even like a more modest job was way more than the kind of life that I would have had back in the USSR. So I already felt like I made it. I didn't have like the normal entry-level software engineering job at Intuit. I didn't feel like I was like trying to make a ton of money. I was just like trying to find ways to make this idea that I have happen. I think that was the main motivating factor. I wasn't really trying to figure out which path gets me the most sort of monetary or financial outcome, because I already felt like my life is already so much better than it would have been. That was just never a goal. And I was always, I think, after the idea came to me, just chasing how do I make it happen and not thinking of that as a business vehicle. I was just thinking of like, what do I need to do to bring this to reality, not to make as much money as possible. Like I literally thought when we were starting Webflow, even this fourth time, that it was going to be the 3 or 4 of us building a small product and having more and more customers, but having this small agency where we're all sitting around one table and building this product. But it turned out to be much bigger than we ever imagined. But that wasn't by design. It was just because we were trying to make this idea, bring it to life, and then put it into the hands of more people. And that just required more and more people. Best advice is there's never a great time to start a startup or have kids. But the other part of that advice is like, you always figure it out. I assumed when we were getting started that I had to hide the fact that I had kids from like investors, advisors. Like the general assumption was that you can't do both. You can't be a parent and start a startup. I think that's fundamentally not true. And I'm glad to see that it's becoming more of a trend where people are just like not afraid to be doing both at the same time. You can totally figure it out. I would say it was probably the biggest factor in us shaping our company culture, the fact that I already had kids, to make sure that we were working in a sustainable way, that we were creating like great benefits. We attracted a lot of other people with families who were generally tended to be more experienced, kind of fresh grads, etc. It was definitely hard, but I think so many great companies have been created by parents, and so many great founders have had kids along the way, and it just worked out. The important thing there is to make sure that you're not choosing one over the other. That you find a way to balance both your family and your life's work. It was definitely, my wife and I talked about having a third kid after the startup already happened. And it felt for a while that Webflow was that third kid. And then by the time kids got a little older, we just decided not to have more kids. But there was in the thick of it, it was like really hard to decide to have more kids, which I think was the right decision. But in a world where I had to choose between having kids or starting a startup, definitely pick both, because both can be like so rewarding and so fulfilling in many different ways. I think a lot of people have like this mental block around, if I already have kids, then it's not possible. Or if I start a startup, then I should never have kids, or until it's like stable. It's never going to be stable. There's never a great time when everything is figured out. So go for what you truly want and need in your life. And a lot of times that's both of those.